Hi, and welcome back to our second part of the video, where we're going to discuss the conflicting perspectives in men and women in the text. So we start off by looking at the husbands and wives dynamic. Portia demands to know of her husband Brutus the sick offence within your mind. And this shows that she is wise because she knows her husband really well and she can tell that he's troubled by something. It also foreshadows with the phrase sick offence, which implies, something's upsetting him, but it also implies that there might be something wrong with his head. So that is foreshadowing the fact that Brutus is going to make the wrong decision about killing Caesar, i.e. he's going to do it when possibly he shouldn't. In general, in the play, the men try to keep the women out of the business of state, despite the fact that they're quite logical and well-spoken, and usually a lot more rational and level-headed than the men, who can be activated by their desire to be manly and heroic and Roman. So Portia makes the case through a pun that women can and should share all their husbands' worries. So she kneels down and asks to know what's wrong, and Brutus says, "Kneel not, gentle Portia." And she says, "I should not need if you were gentle Brutus," implying that he's actually doing wrong by her by not sharing his troubles. Portia then argues via the metaphor. "Within the bond of marriage, tell me, Brutus, is it accepted I should know no secrets that appertain to you? Dwell I but in the suburbs of your good pleasure? If it be no more, Portia is Brutus's harlot, not his wife." So what she's saying there is that if she's only sharing in the good times and not the bad, she is more like a prostitute than his actual wife. So, making that argument, Brutus does decide to tell her what's going on. Calpurnia also senses that trouble's coming for her husband, so we've got almost a bit of a parallel plot running here. And she begs Caesar not to go to the capital, based on her intuition and the reading of bad omens from her dreams. So she asks him to use women's fear as an excuse. So she says, do not go forth today. Call it my fear that keeps you in the house, and not your own." So she uses this distancing language of "call it my fear," which shows that she is very delicately considering Caesar's pride, but deep down, being his wife, she knows that he is afraid. And at first Caesar uses the same distancing language as his wife and says, "For thy humour, I will stay at home." So he's saying, for your sake I'll stay, not for my own. But then his ego gets the better of him, as often does with the poor old Roman men, when Decius Brutus arrives and tempts him with the fact that the Senate has thought about giving him a crown, and so he might miss out if he doesn't go. And then afterwards he implies that Caesar is a coward. So he says, "Break up the Senate, till Caesar's wife shall meet with better dreams. If Caesar hide himself, shall they not whisper, 'Lo, Caesar is afraid'?" So now he's playing on his fear of looking weak in front of the other men. And of course the rhetorical question implies that Caesar is a coward, and worse, in Roman times, that he might be ruled by his wife. So you can't have that. So Caesar changes his mind and of course decides to go to the capital. And he says, "How foolish your fears seem now, Calpurnia. I am ashamed that I did yield to them." Of course, when he does go off to the capital, turns out Calpurnia was right and he gets killed. So of course the irony is that Calpurnia's dream, which is of a statue of Caesar that is running with blood, actually almost comes true. Caesar's blood does spurt like a fountain because he gets stabbed so many times, and it runs over the statue of Pompey, who is someone that Caesar has actually already slain in an earlier battle. So what Shakespeare is showing here is that foolish men ignore the wise perspectives of women, and that they actually are really good counsel and advice, and they are not emotional, or they, use their emotions in a rational way, whereas the men use their emotions in an irrational way. So one of the other conflicting perspectives you can consider is that of whether or not suicide is an okay thing to do. So Brutus declares that suicide is cowardly, and yet all of the senators end up killing themselves in the name of honour when they lose the civil war. So Brutus says, "I did blame Cato for that death which he did give himself. I do find it cowardly and vile." Yet Titinius and Cassius kill themselves for love and honour because they mistakenly believe that the other has died in battle. So we know in Roman context that Cassius and Titinius are what you'd call good friends, which means in real life that they were in fact lovers. So Titinius says in a heroic couplet, "By your leave, gods, this is a Roman's part. come Cassius's sword and find Titanius's heart. So he kills himself with his lover's sword. And he uses the phrase Roman's part as though everything that is noble and manly involves this particular act of suicide. And so we've got two conflicting perspectives of suicide already, and Brutus's death complicates things even further. So his death is quite contradictory. He says that he will have more glory from losing than Antony and Octavius are going to get from winning the civil war. But after he runs on his sword, he delivers his heroic couplet. Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will. So this is very ambiguous because he's saying, I was much happier about killing myself than I was about killing you. So does that mean he regrets killing Caesar or not? So again, this is up to you to consider and debate. So of course, some of the conflicting perspectives about suicide in this text come from the two different contexts that are being considered. So there's obviously Christian ethics, which come from the Elizabethan era, which is that suicide is a mortal sin because God says so. And then there's the Roman setting, where they don't so much count suicide as a sin, they're much more concerned with what is manly and heroic and noble, and basically killing yourself is a more heroic way of being killed than letting your enemies have you. So we've got those two views side by side there. And the problem is, with all of these ideas, what exactly does Shakespeare want you to think? Well, it can be quite difficult to decide because, of course, he has to couch everything in a way that isn't going to get him in trouble with Elizabeth, and he has to leave things open with ambiguousness and doubt so that people can debate and come to their own conclusions. Having said that, you can kind of work through and see what Shakespeare wants you to think about certain things. So we think about the text type of using a dramatic play, which gives each character its own voice, and means that you can present conflicting perspectives much more evenly. So his choice of text type means that he's giving an even voice to different characters to represent their different views. Since he changes Plutarch's story, we know that he wants us to have doubt about which side to be on. So he's deliberately, through choice of what he is taking from the original and through text type, trying to make this open and even and to start a debate. On the surface, we are expected to think that Brutus has made rash and bad decisions. He listens to hearsay, and all the reports of Caesar's tyranny are second-hand stories, which is never a good thing to believe in. And we also know that some of the letters he acts on are definitely faked. We also know that the death of Caesar, a strong leader, creates civil war, which of course, given the great chain of being, is an idea believed very strongly by Elizabethans at the time. However, we also know that Elizabeth I was getting crankier in her old age, and that she was getting more and more tyrannical, and that the court surrounding her was getting more and more fed up by it. And there are a lot of satirical pieces written about this time because nobody felt that they could speak freely with Elizabeth around. So we would have to face the fact that Shakespeare deliberately chose to write about the subject of leadership at a time when it was very dangerous to do so. So presenting Caesar ambiguously was probably the only safe way he could get the public to think about democracy. We also know that the play is called Julius Caesar, yet the title character dies halfway through the play in Act 3. So this tells us that the real protagonist of the story is Brutus, who is the character that represents idealism and democracy in its true form, even though he gets led astray by the other senators. So what does all this mean? In summary, tyranny and Elizabeth are bad. Democracy is good. Action without logic or evidence is bad. Ignoring women's good advice is bad. Brutus is a good character but foolish. Antony is a loving character but unprincipled. Caesar there's no proof really that he was a tyrant, but he probably is a bit of an egotist. The senators are immoral egotists, and suicide is more or less not a sin. So remember that in most of Shakespeare's plays, the noble characters kill themselves in the end. So some web resources that can help you with Julius Caesar. So first off, there is a SparkNotes one for Julius Caesar. It tells you basic summary, themes, symbols, and quotes. Lit charts is particularly good to use for dramatic plays because it tells you what happens in each of the 5 acts, so you can keep track of when the action is occurring. So it's very useful as a cram sheet, and you can print them up as A3 posters and put them on your wall to help you remember stuff about Julius Caesar. Bard Web is probably the most useful one. It analyses Mark Antony's speech in great detail, including all of the rhetoric techniques and iambic pentameter forms, so you'll be able to refer to those as techniques to really impress the markers. And finally, we have Absolute Shakespeare, which does have a really good character analysis and explains a lot of what's going on so you can keep track of everyone. Because the names of all the senators gets confusing, so if you mix up Casca and Cassius quite a lot, then this would be the study sheet for you. That's the end of this lesson. If you feel like you need more help with Julius Caesar, visit us at www.primeeducation.com.au.